All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nikki. I am the Director of Communications and Advancement here at Prosperity Connection. Welcome to our FAFSA, Navigating Student Financial Aid Facebook Live. I am joined by two of the best in the industry, two very trusted partners and experts of ours, and we're really excited to help maybe hopefully demystify FAFSA and the process and give you a little bit of clarity and hopefully make you feel a little bit more confident navigating that student financial aid process. So before we dive in, I will give my two guests a quick second to introduce themselves. Teresa? Nope. Andrea?
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Stewart-Douglas, and I serve as the Senior Associate Director in Student Financial Services at Washington University in St. Louis. Have been with the university for over 11 years now, and I oversee our counseling team there as well as financial literacy and a whole bunch of other initiatives at the university. I love working directly with students and families to make WashU an affordable option.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
My name is Teresa Steinkamp. I'm the Advising Director at the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. The Scholarship Foundation is a nonprofit organization that helps provide students and families with both the resources to pay for college as well as information and resources to make an informed decision about college affordability. I have been with the Scholarship Foundation for almost 15 years and was lucky enough to take advantage of Scholarship Foundation support when I was in school as well. So believe very strongly in the work that we do at the Scholarship Foundation.
Awesome. And like I said, we are so grateful and lucky to have the two of you here. Decades of experience between you. So let's dive in at the highest level. Andrea, do you mind explaining to the audience what is the FAFSA, like at its core? What is it? Because there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misunderstandings. Help us understand it more.
Well, at its core, the FAFSA, which stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So that's what the acronym means. And so FAFSA basically is the application that students would fill out when they are wanting to apply for federal aid. The federal aid could come in the form of a federal Pell Grant. It could come in the form of a federal student loan and work study. So those are the three primary sources of aid that the federal government will provide as a result of the FAFSA.
Okay.
And what it's done is it's used to determine need, demonstrated need. And so students and families will fill out the form providing their income, their asset, and some demographic information. And so the income that would be reported is based upon what we call a 2-year look back or a prior year. So for students that are currently applying for financial aid for the fall 24 school year, this coming fall, they have submitted their information, their income information based on 2022's tax income info.
Okay.
Yeah. But when it comes to filling out the asset portion of the form, you're going to fill out the information based upon what your asset values are at that very moment when you're filling out the form. So that's the key difference.
Okay.
It's a 2-year look back on the income, but it's what the current value is on the day that you're filling out the application. That's what you're putting in. And again, that's for students as well as their parents.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's essentially it in a nutshell.
Okay. We'll dive a little bit more into some of the nuances and some tips and tricks, but I just wanted to make sure we started with kind of the high level. What is this thing that we are supposed to do when ourselves or kiddos or nieces, nephews, people in our lives are going off to college? So Teresa, I've heard some rumblings that this year has been a little less than smooth. So can you explain maybe kind of what some of the hiccups have been and what we know right now about the process and all that?
Yes, so the 24-25 FAFSA opened late, so it did not open until the very end of December, and in a typical year it would open October 1st.
Okay.
So the application opened late and unfortunately opened with a number of technical delays and glitches, and so there are students who are, even as of today, still locked out of filing the FAFSA online. That would include students who are part of a mixed status immigration family, so students whose parents perhaps don't have a social security number are still, as of today, unable to file the form online without elaborate workarounds. So we are working with those students to file a paper FAFSA. So I think as of today, that's one of the biggest technical glitches that remains. However, nobody has a processed FAFSA. So because of inaccuracies in the initial math calculation that federal student aid put together, and just the overwhelming task of getting this new FAFSA prepared and launched on time, they have things that they are still working behind the scenes to address and get ready so that they can send the information to colleges, which means nobody has a processed FAFSA. And so the result of not having a processed FAFSA means students don't have their student aid index, which is the output of the FAFSA. It's what the need is going to be determined off of, is that student aid index. So no one has a student aid index. They don't have their FAFSA submission summary, which a lot of scholarship providers, such as the Scholarship Foundation, ask for as part of our applications. So scholarship providers have had to delay application deadlines. Students don't have financial aid packages from their universities, so they don't know what they're going to be expected to contribute. They don't know what kind of aid they can expect to receive. So it makes it virtually impossible for the average family to make an informed decision about whether or not they can afford to go to college at all, or where they can afford to go. And colleges are still asking for enrollment deposits and housing application fees. And so that's a lot for a family to try to sort of assess and figure out without all of the information.
So it's just like this cascading effect of, I don't have this one thing, so all of these other decisions are being
Yes.
delayed and I can't make them.
Yes.
That is frustrating.
And I would add too that, there are a number of students who've been successful at filing their FAFSA, but they have made an error perhaps, and
Okay.
they need to make a correction, and they can't make a correction until their FAFSA has processed. So we understand, and I haven't heard anything different, that federal student aid is supposed to start processing those applications in March. So schools should start receiving the information by mid-March. So we expect that means federal student aid will begin processing those forms any day now, but it will take a couple weeks for them to get through the backlog of FAFSAs that have been filed over the last 2 months, which means students may still be waiting for a few weeks before they can go in and make those corrections.
Okay. I'm seeing something already in the audience. Cassandra, I believe, is the pronunciation. The overall question is, why am I having trouble with my daughter's FAFSA? Had no issues filling out for her last year. And I think maybe Teresa maybe just lightly touched on the answer for you, Cassandra. Just they, to my knowledge, based on a prior conversation, they redid the FAFSA
Yes.
to make it easier and better. And the glitches that are coming because of this brand new layout are causing issues for everyone. So while you may not have had issues in a prior year, unfortunately, all those changes are probably what's causing the issue this year. So I think you also asked, who do I call to find out? Can you clarify what you're looking to find out? Because if you're looking for just some FAFSA advice, I don't know if...
So then I would call FAFSA directly if you're
Okay.
just looking for some guidance in terms of trying to get the form. Maybe there's some things that they could provide in terms of guidance over the phone or maybe via
Okay.
email. You could also reach out to the financial aid office that your student is applying to.
Okay.
But in all honesty, the best advice that we would have for you is to keep trying to try to get the form submitted. We are hearing that people are beginning to have some success in getting their forms submitted. So I would just be diligent and continue to, get that, or at least attempt to get it in. And then also find out if perhaps the school has adjusted their timeline in terms of their deadline. There are some schools who are pushing back their deadline in light of the fact that folks are still having difficulty getting their forms in. So, I would try that. Try FAFSA, try the school, and just kind of get guidance on what they would, suggest that you do at this point.
And if I could add, the Scholarship Foundation does have a team of 6 student advisors. So if you're looking for someone who can sit down with you and take a look at the application, we know that a lot of students and families are still struggling to get through to federal student aid through customer service channels, and so that's not always an easy option. We can sit down and look at the FAFSA with you. There are some very weird technical glitches. So for example, the parent is not supposed to be able to fill out their information under the student's login. They're supposed to have to log in under the parent login. But what we have seen this year is some students are able to answer the parent questions under their login, but that means that the parent can't sign. And so that's an example of a technical glitch where if the parent can't find their signature page, it might be just that they're under the wrong login, and that's a fairly easy fix, but it's not obvious if you don't know what you're looking at.
Okay. Perfect. You made me think of a question that we hadn't talked about beforehand, so surprise. It sounds like most people, before I ask this, have most folks applied, or are there folks out there that would maybe still need to know what you need to have, like what information you might need to have to file the FAFSA? Would that still be helpful, or do you feel like most folks have probably already filed?
A lot of people haven't filed.
I think a lot of people haven't.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So what do you need when you're going to sit down and file? What information do you need? What material? I don't know.
So, you're going to need, I would suggest that you have a copy of your 2022 tax return, even though with the feature now, you'll be able to, because when you're going into the FAFSA initially, you all have to provide consent as a contributor on the FAFSA. So the student is a contributor, you as a parent would be a contributor. And so when you're providing that consent at the outset of filling out the form, what that means is that you're giving the IRS the authority to make what they call a federal transfer of information. So using the FTI, they're going to be able to directly transfer your 2022 tax information directly from their site, from their database over to Department of Ed, to the FAFSA. And so that's a direct transfer that's happening. But I think it's still a good idea to, at least have, you don't get to see it necessarily. I don't think you do.
No.
But I just think it's a good idea to have your tax information there, your W-2 information for you and your student if the student's worked and has reportable income. Definitely your statements from your bank accounts, if you have brokerage accounts. So all of that information would be really helpful just to have together in the event that maybe one day, if as you're working and navigating through this process, you might need to go and refer back to that, especially when it comes to dependents, when you're trying to indicate, because what's going to happen is the transfer of data is going to pull in the individuals that you reported as dependents on your tax return for 2022, but that might not be the case right now. So there could be a change in that. And so you're going to want to make sure that you indicate who the right dependents are within your household. And that would be individuals like, your student, any siblings, folks that are in your household where you're providing more than 50% support, financial support. But again, that might be slightly different than what's on the tax return for 2022. So you're going to want to make sure that you put that information in the FAFSA. And then there's a process that would come later on, verification to, that you'd have to work through, but on the back end. But I think, again, just having all of the information that you're going to be putting on your FAFSA, to have that all compiled together in one place, again, in the event that you may need to go back and refer to it later.
Can never be overprepared.
Yeah, so I would definitely reinforce having tax returns with you. The student and their parent or parents will also be required to have what's called a federal student aid ID. It's a username and password. And so if you have not yet created your federal student aid ID, I would recommend having your social security card handy. It's really critical that the information that you input when creating your federal student aid ID match exactly what's on the social security card, because the Social Security Administration does have to verify your identity. And in my day-to-day work with students and families, one of the biggest challenges we run into is trying to figure out IDs that have not been verified because something was misentered, and it tends to cause delays and significant additional problems. I would then say that you need your federal student aid ID when you sit down to do the FAFSA, because you will need to log in with that information. This sounds like a strange thing to suggest, and I know most of us have it with us all the time, but you'll need to have access to your cell phone or your email address when you sit down to do the FAFSA, because there is two-factor authentication to get into the accounts now. And so you'll want to have all of that information. And we would advise that you create your federal student aid ID, if you haven't already, 3 to 5 days before you sit down to do the FAFSA. As Andrea said, you will have your tax information ideally shared directly from the IRS with federal student aid, but in order for that to happen, your identity has to be verified. And so it takes a little bit of time for the Social Security Administration to do that identity verification.
Okay. And I saw that one of my behind the scenes colleagues has just plugged into the chat some FAFSA requirements that Teresa brought. So if you want kind of maybe a summary, or is it maybe a single doc, like a PDF?
It's like a web link, but it gives
link.
you an idea of things
Perfect.
that you may need, and it's intended to be all inclusive. So if something doesn't apply to your circumstances, it may not be something you need to have, but it may be something that somebody else needs to have.
Okay, so those are in the chat for anyone curious. Okay, so let's move into maybe some tips or tricks or little known things that I feel like you guys just did a really good job with all the things that you'll need to file the FAFSA, but is there anything that you see as a common issue folks have that you find yourself repeating the same tip over and over, or anything like that that you'd want to share?
Yeah, so I would again emphasize, make sure you get the right social security number and name and birth date when you're creating the federal student aid ID. A simple, typo of 2 digits being transposed can really cause a big headache. So even if you feel like you know everything and you feel confident you've entered it correctly, I would encourage you to double check and just verify that before you submit the federal student aid ID. The other thing is, I would really recommend writing everything down: your username, your password, the answers to your challenge questions. I know it sounds silly because most of us have dozens of usernames or passwords that we use online, but the security around these are so tight that it is something that students and families spend a lot of time on. And please do not create an ID for anyone but yourself. If I create one for my parent and my younger sibling comes behind me and needs my parent's ID, if my parent didn't create it, they may not know the challenge question and the answers, and then that becomes a bigger headache for the family. So that's one recommendation. There was another thing I was thinking, but it's escaped me.
Well, you kind of hit on it earlier. The other thing I would just mention is that if you do need to make a correction, so you know that maybe you inputted some information incorrectly in the FAFSA, as Teresa said earlier, we're not going to, us being colleges and universities, we're not going to begin to receive those files until probably about the middle part of this month. And that is only when you're going to be able to make any corrections once your FAFSA has been processed. So I would just stay in touch with the financial aid office to determine the timing of when that office has received your FAFSA information. And then once you know that, immediately go in as soon as you can and make the appropriate correction, and then even notify the school that you've made a correction because there's tons of files, hundreds of thousands of files that are now going to be hitting our offices at the same time.
Yeah.
And so there's such a backlog right now that, as Teresa alluded to, we're going to be very busy in the month of April trying to reconcile and get caught up on so many different things. So I don't think it's a bad idea to, again, communicate with the office, let them know what you personally have done. And so they have records of all of that. They'll keep it and be able to look out for that information if you need them to.
I did realize what I was thinking. So for students, when you fill out your portion of the FAFSA, there's a question that we have found to be not well worded and is causing a lot of confusion. So there's a page on the FAFSA that will ask the students whether or not they want to be considered for an unsubsidized loan only. And so what that question is really asking is, as the student, does your parent or parents refuse to provide information for the FAFSA? And so especially for a lot of our traditional age students, most of them are going to be required to have a parent or their parents contribute to the FAFSA. But the question is not especially well worded. If you don't understand what it's asking and you're not clear which way to answer, that question is actually a reason why a lot of students need to go in and make corrections.
Okay.
Unless your parent is actually refusing to provide information for the FAFSA, the answer to that question is most likely going to be no. If you say yes to that question, what it means is my parent will not contribute or their information for the FAFSA, and I can only be considered for an unsubsidized loan, which is not the most desirable form of financial aid for most students. And if your parent really will contribute information to the FAFSA, they're unable to do so until you can go in and make a correction, because you need to be able to invite your parent to contribute, and you don't issue that invitation if you say that they're unwilling to contribute.
Okay. You just made me think of a off the cuff question. What's the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, they're both direct federal loans from the Department of Education, but
Okay.
there's a big difference between the two. Subsidized basically means that a student is taking out a loan, a federal loan, but the interest that's accruing on that loan, the student won't be subject for repaying that.
Okay.
Unless when they graduate and 6 months after their grace period has expired, they still have not paid off the principal that they've borrowed on that loan. That's when the clock begins to tick for them, and then they'll be subject to paying whatever the interest accrues from that moment forward. But
Okay.
while they're in school and that interest is accruing behind the scenes, the government is basically paying that
Okay.
interest.
Okay.
So we almost call it an interest-free loan
Okay.
until they, graduate. But the unsubsidized loan is the one where the government is not paying that interest. And so if you take out that loan, I always caution students to be mindful of the fact that that interest does accrue,
Yeah.
even though they don't necessarily have to pay back that loan until they graduate, because it's
Okay.
also deferred.
Okay.
The interest is still accruing, and so they're going to be subject to paying the principal plus the interest
that
that's
accrued
accrued over the time that they've been in school. So it's a much more expensive loan to have
Okay.
to pay back.
So like it's just like a quick, and this math will not be correct, so do not quote me on this, but like a $10,000 loan, unsubsidized, if interest is accruing, when they get done with college, it may have become like a $15,000 loan that they're now paying back. Is that right?
Well, right,
Yeah.
that's right.
Whatever the percentage.
Yeah, but
would
what,
be.
yeah, exactly.
But
But that's the
more.
principal.
Yes.
Right. The loan will be more expensive because of the fact of the interest accrual.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I have a quick question from the chat. Tulani would like to know, I tend to file a tax extension. Do you have to have your 2023 tax returns complete before applying?
So not for the 24-25 FAFSA. So if you are going to need to file the 25-26 FAFSA, and this is like way down the road, right? But if you're going to need to file a 25-26 FAFSA, you would want to have your 2023 tax returns done before you do that form. And I say that because, again, in a typical year, the FAFSA is going to open October 1st. Fingers crossed that will happen this fall. And if that does happen, I know sometimes families who file tax extensions run into that where they haven't gotten their tax returns filed and processed. And so it may not be possible for that tax information to be shared via the IRS. So you would want to have it done before the 25-26 FAFSA.
Okay.
But I think this is a really good point to bring up about appeals. So, one of the things that we do in our office, which most financial aid offices will do, is so if the 2023 income is lower, significantly lower in some cases than 2022's income, we can go in and take a review or take that into consideration under something called professional judgment. So as a financial aid officer, if I know that that's the situation and that family appeals, I can then take that 2023 income, use that in my calculation to determine need.
Okay.
And that has significantly, helped out families be eligible for aid, and in cases a big increase in that student's award. So the point is that award offers whenever they financial aid offers whenever they do get released, and we're anticipating that a majority of them are going to come out in April. If you see that it's still not that offer that's not in an affordable range for you and your family, certainly encourage you to appeal to that financial aid office, and saying that your income for 2023 is a lot less than 2022's that's been reported on the FAFSA is a wonderful reason to appeal. And so from there, there may be some other things that that financial aid officer could help you with in terms of tweaking or finding other things that they can adjust on. But that is a really good reason to go back to that school and say, I need you all to reevaluate my offer.
Things change.
That's right.
Yes, and then
Yeah.
that's a very long period of time for
Yes,
things
it
to,
absolutely is.
lots of things can happen.
Well,
so.
and the other thing that your points made me think about is for students who are continuing, who maybe are already in college and who are filing the FAFSA again for this year, there's a lot of the underlying math components in the FAFSA that are different this year. So although most of them are designed to be advantageous for students, there are some students who are honestly going to see a loss of financial aid.
Right.
And so if you find yourself losing financial aid as a result of those changes, we would also encourage you to have a conversation with your financial aid office or to explore outside resources. So one example of a change in the math that will prove to be difficult for some students and families is that in the past, the FAFSA took into consideration if you had more than one dependent in your household enrolled in college at the same time. That is not the case moving forward. So, for example, I have twins. They're a long way off from college, but under the old math, if I had both of them going to college at the same time, the math the FAFSA did would have taken that into consideration, and it's not going to anymore. And so for some students who are in college already simultaneously as their siblings, they may see a loss of aid moving forward. And so we would recommend that you have that conversation with the financial aid office, or you look to outside resources such as the Scholarship Foundation, because we will be taking that information into consideration as part of our awards.
Cool. Any last tips or insights before we move into the last piece of the conversation?
I think the only thing I would mention, I know the focus is FAFSA, but we are a CSS profile school. And so there are a number of private colleges and universities that utilize that financial aid form. So that's a second form that some schools will require. And that form is basically determining how much institutional aid. So students can get their federal aid through the FAFSA, but then the CSS profile will allow us to determine how much our own private institutional money. One of the things I would like to point out in light of what Teresa just said is that when you use that CSS profile, it gives us the ability to continue to provide that sort of discount for multiple students in college. So even though it's gone away on the FAFSA, with the CSS profile, we're able to retain that. So that's been a wonderful, benefit for students that have been applying to our school, keeping that in place.
Yeah, and most schools don't use the CSS profile.
That's true.
So
That is true.
But I would just say you don't have to do any of this alone. I know that it's really daunting for students and families to file the FAFSA, especially this year with the changes and the delays, and there's a lot of frustration and frankly anxiety for some students and families. So again, I would just say that there are folks who will help you at no cost. Remember, it's free application for federal student aid. You should never have to pay for support with completing it. And even at the Scholarship Foundation, we have the ability to support with bilingual assistance. We do have a Spanish-speaking advisor who can assist with the FAFSA as well.
Before I ask our last open-ended question, I know you brought provided several materials.
Yes.
It looks like we've already popped some into the chat. What are some of the other ones that you brought so my behind-the-scenes colleague can pop those in
now
there?
I'm trying to remember what all I sent you.
No, that's totally fine. She can also just pop them in there.
I know that I provided, so we have one-pagers on creating the federal student aid ID, so that username and password, we have one in English and one in Spanish. So we have both of those. The list of information that you may need to have on hand when you sit down to file the FAFSA. But I believe I also shared our FAFSA workbook. So, if you're sitting there and you are like me and live in the weeds and want to see more about the FAFSA, what the screenshots look like, what questions you might actually have to answer, that may be a good resource. And then it looks like they just dropped in the chat the link to the advisor bios. So again, we have a team of 6 advisors. You can reach out to any one of us for a free appointment for anything ranging from help with the FAFSA to help with an appeal at an institution for financial circumstances that have changed, or verification paperwork, or reviewing financial aid letters once you actually get them, hopefully in the next few weeks here.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you kind of alluded to this perfectly, Andrea. Let's talk about other forms. Yes, we wanted to make sure we hopefully clarified stuff around FAFSA, but there are lots of other opportunities for other student aid. So I'd love to give you each just a few minutes to talk about University and Scholarship Foundation, the different opportunities available, scholarships, grants, any clarity you can offer around those other forms of student financial aid.
Yeah.
So in addition to the need-based scholarships that we provide at WashU based on the FAFSA and that CSS profile, there are several merit scholarship opportunities that our students can apply to. In fact, we just had a big scholarship weekend this past weekend. And so a lot of them are full tuition, some half, but full tuition and even stipend in some cases. So I always encourage students to never leave money on the table, apply for those scholarships. Make sure you understand what the process is, though, at the schools that you're considering, because different schools are going to have different processes in place. Some schools you don't have to do anything other than just submit your admissions application, and you'll automatically be considered for their merit opportunities. But at our school, we have those, but then we also have what we call signature scholarships, where students have to do a little bit extra work. So they have to do a separate essay response or apply to a response for an essay prompt. There are interviews, which is what we did this past weekend. And so, yeah, just make sure that you understand what that process is and go for it. So, yeah, that would be one thing I would say. But then in terms of outside scholarships, the other real important tip to know about is to understand how the outside scholarship process works at the school that you're considering. So there are the school scholarships, but if you are, seeking scholarships outside of the college or university, make sure you know what their policy is around that, because if you bring in an outside scholarship, that school could possibly, reduce the money that they've already provided to you through something called scholarship displacement. And so make sure you understand how that works. And if that school policy does have displacement in place, meaning that they're going to reduce their portion, see if they can do it based on a specific hierarchy. So let's say they packaged you with a federal loan. See if they'll replace that federal loan with whatever outside scholarship money that you bring in first, as opposed to immediately going to reducing whatever the scholarship is that they've given you. So just, again, know what they're going to do.
And I feel like I hear a theme of almost over communication. I know
Yes,
sometimes
ma'am.
like asking for things is hard, but something I say to people all the time is like, the worst they can say is no. So you might as well ask. So it sounds like you just need to over communicate,
Yes.
over ask, put yourself out there.
That is something that whenever we do presentations with prospective families, we always say, make a friend in the financial aid office. That's sort of like our little motto, but that is the truth.
Yeah.
Over communicate, share what you can, and ask tons of questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Teresa?
So the Scholarship Foundation provides a variety of different funding resources directly to students to help them pay for their education. So we have a number of grant programs, as well as an interest-free, fee-free student loan program. We are currently accepting applications for all of those, and they're due May 15th. So a couple real quick points. So the main criteria we're looking for are academic potential. So it's a 2.0 cumulative GPA or higher, good character, and financial needs. So we're looking first for a student aid index of 17,500 or less, but we will take into consideration a change of circumstance, extenuating circumstances, students who have siblings enrolled in college simultaneously to reduce that SAI. We also want to be last dollar funding. So our goal is to help students avoid borrowing any federal loans in their name or the parent's name. And so we do not use any federal loans in our math when we're making an award. And we would also really underscore understanding how your college is going to treat outside scholarships. However, with the exception of one of our grant programs, all of our checks are made payable directly to the student, because we are very carefully doing the math to help students avoid having to borrow federal loans. And so we are aiming to not over award, and because we have done that math very carefully, we want to be sure that the student does not end up with any of their aid being displaced through the funding that we have offered to them. So the bulk of our checks are made directly to the student. And again, our deadline is May 15th. That is not typical. So in a typical year, it would be April 15th, but we've adjusted our deadline because of the FAFSA delays. And so I'm just planting that seed in case you're thinking ahead for the FAFSA or other things. In a typical year, it would be April 15th. And if you need help, you can apply for any of our programs online, but you can again consult with an advisor for assistance with the application. To give you a quick sense of scale, we're currently funding 527 students with over $5 million in grants and interest-free loans.
That's incredible. That's really awesome. And I thank you to whoever is doing socials over at Scholarship Foundation, because I saw you pop a few more links, really helpful links in for the folks in the chat. So thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. We're already over time, but this has been such a rich conversation, and I want to give y'all one last chance to plug in any questions that you might have in the comments. And while we wait to see if anybody does that, any closing thoughts or comments? No pressure. I know it's like so open-ended.
Well, I think I'll just continue to underscore the communication. If there are any questions whatsoever, reach out to the financial aid office, even over the summer. there's a big gap of time between, spring and fall. And so if things come up, especially if there are changes in your family situation that's going to impact your ability to pay whatever your portion is, make sure that you reach out to the financial aid office and let them know, because again, adjustments can be made in response to that.
Yeah. Communication is important. And again, there's lots of help. So please know that you don't have to do it alone. And there are folks who are in your corner and will do what they can to support you in navigating this pathway, because we understand that it can be daunting.
Yep. And that's exactly why we do things like this and let these videos exist. So for those of you that have been here before and are familiar, this video will live indefinitely as long as Meta decides in this event on Facebook. But we're also in the process of overhauling our YouTube, so it'll eventually live over there. So you can always come back and refer to this fabulous information. So I just want to thank the two of you so much. This was great. I hope that you all enjoyed. I mean, we had lots of great questions. So thank you to all involved. We appreciate it. We will see you again in a couple weeks. Our next video will be internal. Our PC staff will be talking to you about what you might be able to do with your tax return, some strategies and tips for making the most of that money. So hopefully we will see you then. Thanks again for joining.